Recording in progress.
She's coming to us, and she's got a lot of information, has a PowerPoint, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate this invitation to talk about plastic pollution. Got off to a rocky start. My worst nightmare is my computer was not functioning properly, and of course that led into a whole snowballing problem. Trying to get it to work, and then inadvertently hitting the audio button. So I'm sorry for all the confusion, but I'm here and everything's good now. So I was very impressed looking at your website by your statement of principles and your support for Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ rights. And I was moved by the testimony this morning by people. I too was at the rally and felt very inspired by what I heard. I want to start by quoting a statement from your principles. This is indeed a time to confront powers and structures of people with justice, compassion, transforming power of love. Can you help me get the PowerPoint? My husband is get the PowerPoint up so I don't screw it up again. Okay. Is that good? Okay. We have a moral obligation and an urgent call to safeguard our communities from corporate exploitation. Our politicians are protecting the interests of corporations, the wealthiest few, especially the fossil fuel industry, at the expense of our welfare. The government is removing regulations on fossil fuel fracking at a time of existential threat from fracking and plastic production. We should be reducing plastic, not removing regulations. This push to increase plastic production is going to accelerate climate change and cause possibly irreversible harm to our ecosystem as well as our health. We've got to stop this from doing more damage to our planet. That means not only making personal choices to stop using single-use plastic, but also to educate other people about the dangers of plastic, educate yourself, and have a relationship with your legislators so that you are always communicating with them, letting them know what your community wants and what your community needs. I put a couple of websites in the chat. One is beyondplastics.org, which is a great source of information. Sign up to get webinars by the latest researchers and the latest research on plastic pollution. And also Plastic Coalition, which has a lot of really, really good resources. So I'm going to, let's get it, a slideshow. Okay. Hold on, I'm going to put it in. Okay. So today I want to talk about why pollution plastic is causing terrible climate change problems. The myth around recycling, which the fossil fuel industry has pushed as a way to keep using single-use plastic, it's a lie. You cannot recycle it. The social justice issues, how it's transported, all the basics about plastic and why it's causing the health problems it is, as well as talking about a few of the legislative pieces that you have in your legislature, state legislature right now. So let's start with the basics. Nearly 9 million tons of plastics have been produced since 1950. All of that plastic is still in our environment today, and it does not completely break down. 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels, mainly natural gas, fracking of natural gas. A lot of people don't realize that. And ethane is the byproduct of that fracking, and that's what's used to produce plastic. There's also 16,000 chemicals that are added, loosely bonded, that 4,200 of which are considered unsafe for human health. And when we look at the microplastics and nanoplastics, they are everywhere in our environment. On the right side of the screen are the microplastics. They're the size of a pencil eraser. And on the left side of the nanoplastics, which are invisible, the size of a virus. And up in the corner are the microfilaments that we shed from our upholstery and carpets and other clothing in our houses, and that ends up in the air and we breathe it and it ends up in our water. There are a few problems. There are many problems actually with what plastics are doing to our environment. And not only is it affecting all marine life, killing many animals because they eat the plastic and die from not being able to digest, but it's also killing the phytoplankton or interfering with the functioning of the phytoplankton, which keep the oceans healthy. And it's also affecting our soils. Our soils are saturated with microplastics, and it's interfering with the decomposer's ability to break down organic matter and make healthy soil. So it's interfering with all life on Earth. And if you look at this plant up in the left corner, it has plastic in it, little microplastics in it, which are interfering with its functioning. So our plants are having lower yields and they're smaller in size. And it's also trapping animals in the netting and killing them. They estimate that 2 to 3 dump loads of microplastics are entering our ocean every minute. So that gives you an idea of just how enormous the problem is. When we talk about climate change, production of plastic started at about 2 million tons in the 1950s, and now it's at 400 million tons. And it's doubling every 15 to 20 years. As you can see, the trajectory, it's going way up. And if we don't reduce plastic production, we will have 1.2 billion metric tons by 2060. This could be an extremely serious issue and could put us over the tipping edge for being able to control climate change. Right now, the emissions from plastics are 232 million tons of carbon a year, and that's equal to about 50 million cars. But by 2060, if we don't reduce production, it'll be 4.3 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And the petrochemical company, instead of saying, oh, we realize now that we're doing terrible harm to the planet, we need to stop producing throwaway plastic to save us. No, on the opposite end, they are pushing for more production of plastic and throwaway plastic, particularly because that's where the profit is. They want to put 80% of their growth in plastic, single-use plastic production, which would be devastating to our environment. And they are doing that because they are losing their market in heat and energy and fuel to renewable energy. So we need to say to them, no, this is not right and this is not moral. The production of plastic, 40% of it is for packaging, and that's all unnecessary packaging. We just throw it away within minutes, and also the throwaway products that we use. So we could easily get rid of those and be much better off. And if we got 40% of that production reduced, we would end up doing a great service to reducing plastic production. And as you can see on the right, you think about it, it's the craziest thing that we're just opening something that's so damaging and throwing it right into the environment to do more damage. The second largest production is in clothing, and fast fashion has become a thing. Polyester clothing is contaminating our environment. So you may wonder, how does microplastic get all over the world? It's even in places where people are not. And that's because microplastics are attracted to dust, and the dust carries them all over the world. And the microplastics are attracted to the dust from tires on the roads, the plastic in the tires, the sea spray, which is saturated with microplastics, and the agricultural soil, which is also saturated. And that's because when we wash our polyester clothing, all of the polyester microfibers go into the wastewater treatment plant, and they're not filtered out, so they end up in the sludge. And of course, the farmers use that sludge as fertilizer. Researchers have researched how many microplastics are in food and what foods they're in. They found them in almost all foods. And if you look at that top number there for bottled water and bottled beverages in plastic, it's 250,000 to 500,000 nanoplastics per liter. So researchers are saying, stop drinking bottled water and bottled beverages in plastic, and you will really do a lot to protect yourself from microplastics. The Consumer Reports came out with a study recently that phthalates, which are a very toxic chemical in plastics, are in almost all of our foods, and in some they are in very high, very harmful levels. So we have a bill in Minnesota to test and report on phthalates in microplastics and in our food. In our homes, there's many ways that we can reduce plastic. They're in our food containers and beverage containers, our clothing, our cleaning supplies, our cosmetics, our flooring, our carpets, and our siding. So what I suggest to people is replace your food containers with glass or steel containers. Use compostable or reusable bags instead of trash bags, and aluminum foil wrap for your plates if you're going to store things. Aluminum foil, or put a plate on top of your food to store it. Use baking soda and vinegar instead of cleaning products. And my son just told me about, he's a carpenter, clay and milk paint, which does not have microplastics. Then as far as flooring, try to use cork, bamboo, or wood, not vinyl flooring or laminate. Cotton, hemp shower curtains rather than plastic. And polyester carpets are not good. They shed fibers and you breathe them in. So I suggest cotton and wool. As far as siding, stay away from vinyl siding. It has toxic chemicals in it. Use stucco, brick, metal, wood, and stone. And you'll be doing the people who are working in the vinyl siding factories a favor. Cotton, linen, hemp, bamboo, and wool clothing instead of polyester. I'm going to talk now about the health effects of plastics. And microplastics and break down into nanoplastics, and we breathe those in and we eat them, and they get through the lining of our intestinal and lung wall into our bloodstream. And there they can do damage to our blood cells. They get into our blood cells and they can cause blood damage and death. They also can circulate around our body and get into our organs and cause damage and cause cancer from inflammation. And when they're in our intestinal tract, our body sees them as a foreign object, and they set up an inflammatory response, which lowers our immune system and also causes damage to our intestines. It can damage the mucous linings of our intestine and interfere with the normal bacterial flora. And the inflammation is connected with inflammatory bowel disease. People who have that, it's reported that they have higher amounts of nanoplastics in their stool. It's also crossing our blood-brain barrier and causing problems in our brain. People with Alzheimer's and dementia, when their brains are dissected, they've had 10 times more nanoplastics in their brains than normal people. And now they're thinking there's a link to the onset of Parkinson's disease as well. Surgeons are reporting that people with strokes and heart attacks have higher levels of microplastics in their artery plaque, and they predict that 4.5 people with those higher levels will have 4.5 times greater risk of heart attacks and strokes and death. And unfortunately, it's really affecting our fertility. It's getting into our reproductive organs, and the testicles in men are affected to such degree that the sperm is lower quality and smaller count. And it's also affecting reproductive organs in women. And in our brains, it can damage the hippocampus memory center, which is responsible for learning disabilities. My screen is not, there we go. Now I'm going to talk about the chemicals that are in plastics, and they are loosely bonded in the plastics themselves, so they leach readily. 4,200 of them are considered harmful to our health. And these are the 5. This is kind of a complicated chart, but if you look at the left side, there are 5 that have a red flag by researchers as being particularly harmful to us, and that's bisphenols, phthalates, PFAS, you've probably heard of that, flame retardants, and heavy metals, and they are all used to either make plastic strong or clear or flexible or add color, and they're in most every plastic. I just want to point out something quickly, that when it says BPA free, if you look at the column on the left under bisphenols, that does not necessarily mean that it's free of bisphenols. In the lining of cans, we'll have BPA-F and S instead of BPA, and that is just as harmful. So the plastics industry has a way of replacing just as harmful products as they take out when people get upset, and then not telling people that they're in there. So linings of cans are problematic. All of these chemicals are called endocrine disrupting chemicals because they interfere with our hormones. And our hormones are really important in protecting in managing the systems of our body. So some of the effects from these hormone disrupting drugs are obesity, reproductive disorders, neurological problems like ADHD, autism, depression, and behavioral problems, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, cardiovascular problems, diabetes, and cancers, especially cancers of the reproductive organs like cancer of the breast, prostate, ovaries, and testicles. And then, of course, lowering of the IQ and cancer of the brain. You may think it's okay to use reusable plastic, but in fact, unfortunately, it's not. Studies were done in Copenhagen that show that after water sat in these bottles, they leached chemicals into the bottles. And if you heat it put it in the dishwasher, that accelerates the leaking of the chemicals. So they're not safe either. You're better off using glass or stainless steel. Now, there's this huge myth that the fossil fuel industry is perpetuating, and they are telling us that it's okay to keep using throwaway plastic because they can recycle it. It is not recyclable. It just breaks down. It is recyclable 1 and 2. The numbers 1 and 2 are recyclable, downcycled a couple of times, and then they are not fit for being used again. So 1 and 2 are the only ones that can be recycled in your recycling bin, and in some communities 5. 3, 6, and 7 have toxic chemicals in them that you should not use. 3 is polyvinyl chloride, which is very toxic, and EPA is thinking of banning it. 6 is polystyrene, which is styrofoam that has benzene and styrene that are labeled and known carcinogens. And 7 is a combination of different plastics that can't be separated and have chemicals in them. So, they're talking about how great it is. You can recycle. Only 2 are recyclable, and only a couple of times downcycle. And try not to drink out of styrofoam because of the carcinogenic chemicals, and they accelerate leaching the hotter the drink is. And if you're buying bottled oils and fatty materials, do it in glass, because plastic is attracted to fatty material and it'll leach more quickly from plastic containers. To continue with this recycling myth, the recycling plants that we have, when they shred down the materials to make new products, they give off 400,000 tons of microplastics into the air and the water. So we're actually exacerbating the problem rather than fixing it. And that's equal to about 29,000 dump trucks. A lot we don't have a market for, and so we ship it overseas. 1/3 is shipped to other countries, developing countries that do not have the infrastructure to recycle these. And so they end up burying them in shallow landfills, and they get into the air and the water and the soil, or they burn them in open fields, which you can imagine, burning plastic in open fields, what kind of pollution they're going to have and what kind of lung diseases. The other way that they have of recycling plastic is to burn it, and that is a very terrible idea because it is creating greenhouse gases and toxic emissions equal to 1.6 million cars driven a year. So we don't want to do that. That's just exacerbating the climate change problems we have. And then the other thing is the ash, that's residue from the burning of the plastics, has to be buried in landfills, in lined and monitored landfills, with the toxic emissions contaminating the air and the soil. So you're not only burning and creating toxic emissions, but then you're burying as well and creating toxic emissions. The latest thing that I want to warn you about is the chemical recycling solution that the plastics industry has perpetuated. Yes, this will solve all of our problems. We'll melt it down and turn it into new plastics. But in fact, the chemical recycling does only 1.3% of plastics is actually recycled into plastics. The rest is melted down into dirty fuels and chemicals and gases, which are also contaminating our environment and giving off toxic emissions to the communities around them. They are all struggling financially. They can't make a profit. There's very little market, and they are losing money. Some of them are closing, and they're very ineffective, except that they're polluting the communities and costing the communities a lot of money to try to make this work, and it's not a solution. And when we talk about social justice issues, this is a biggie. 90% of the emissions from plastic production is in 18 communities along Texas and Louisiana coastline. And these communities have terrible pollution. They have much higher rates of cancers, especially brain cancer, lung diseases, and other diseases. And majority of them are minority populations of economically challenged. And so, they probably don't have good health care, and they don't have the means to relocate. And there's a woman, Sharon Levine, who is a huge organizer here, who was able to successfully keep out chemical company from building theirs and saving them from more pollution, and also Formosa company, which was going to build a $9.25 billion huge factory that would have doubled the air pollution. She was able to, with her volunteers, to successfully keep them out. So there are a lot of people working to try to stop this in their communities. Here are the bills that you in Indiana have, and I have a thumbs up and thumbs down to help you figure this out. You have a ban on your people, your communities being able to ban or put fees or taxes on problematic products that they don't want to be producing or have in their community. The fossil fuel industry was able to push through this legislation to keep you from banning things that are harmful. The fossil fuel industry does not have the right to tell communities what they can and can't do. You need to overturn this so that you could put a ban on plastic bags. 6 other states have done this, and many others are looking at doing it. And we have introduced a fee on plastic bags in Minnesota with a bill to overturn the ban on bags. The other bad one that you are trying to push through is advanced recycling. You really need to contact your legislators and say, we do not want this in our community. I have a fact sheet that I can send to you. They are making it, categorizing it as a manufacturing process rather than a waste disposal process, so that they don't have to follow the higher regulation standards for air pollution, and then they can get away with more pollution. So that's a tricky thing they do, and you don't want it to be labeled manufacturing. You want it to be labeled as waste disposal so that it has the proper regulations for the air monitoring. You have a really good bill that you passed to be able to reuse drinking cups and containers and refill systems. And coming up, you have 2 really good pieces of legislation you should support. Be sure to support this one. It would be a ban on single-use plastic items in restaurants and third-party food delivery services, and using refill systems or compostable instead. That would be wonderful if you were able to pass that. And the other one is the climate change task force to study the impacts of climate change on Indiana. So please contact your legislators and tell them to support these. And I just want to close by saying that we have the power to make change, and we must realize that we do. There are more of us than them, as I said at the rally yesterday, and courage is contagious. As you can see, you don't need advanced degrees, you don't need fancy titles, you don't need to be an expert. All you need to do is learn as much as you can about plastic and what it's doing, organize people, educate people, and contact your legislators continually to let them know and get other people to contact. We have perfect examples here in Sharon Levine, who was able to stop those chemical companies, and Amara Strandy, who was a student at 15 years old, got PFAS poisoning, had multiple cancers that eventually killed her. The PFAS poisoning was from 3M dumping 4 million gallons of PFAS in the unlined pits that got into their drinking water and tainted an entire community east of St. Paul, where many people suffered from cancers and diseases as a result. Hers was fatal. But she had the courage and strength, even as she was dying, to attend 5 different hearings to insist that they pass the ban on PFAS in our state so that no other students would have to go through what she went through. She died 2 weeks before they passed the bill, but this is one of the strongest bills in the country.
Sorry.
So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you are inspired to act to reduce plastic production.
At the, on the way out, is on the chair, there's a chair outside the doors of the sanctuary that has fact sheets and things to do and not do. So if you want to pick that up to be able to remind yourselves about that, it's on the chair just outside the doors here. And later on this month, I will have letters for you to sign to senators about this stuff that she talked about. And so they'll be out there later on.